All right, so let's remind ourselves. I think we got to take a second and just talk about factoring. Seems like that's not as fresh in your minds as I maybe would hope it would be, right? So that's okay. So if I'm trying to factor a simple quadratic trinomial, it's a simple one because a is equal to 1, right? Let's just remind ourselves how we do that, right? This is where we got to find magic numbers. Okay, so what do the magic numbers have to do here? I want to be able to write this as a product of two factors. Okay. When I'm factoring something, and let's just remind ourselves what factoring even means, I guess, before we jump into this. Like, what if I did, okay, what if I did this? What if I wanted to multiply some stuff out? What if I wanted to multiply out x plus 3 times x minus 5? How do I do that? Okay, I just distribute, don't I? So I'm going to distribute the x's, the x all the way through, and then I just distribute the 3 all the way through, and I just add up like terms, right? I just distribute from one of the binomials into the other one, okay? And when I do that, what am I going to get? Let's see, I get x squared minus 5x plus 3x minus 15. Everybody agree? Okay, and so I end up with my product of x plus 3 times x minus 5. If I combine like terms, what about if I combine the x terms? What's negative 5x plus 3x? Negative 2x minus 15. Okay, so that process we just did, if I start here and I go there, that's multiplying, right? Or our math word for that is expanding. What if I want to reverse the process? Because I can start on either side. Like I could start here and go backwards to write it as a product of factors. What do I call that? What do I call that? It's kind of the, I mean, it's starts with an F. Factoring, yeah. Okay, so that's factoring. When we go the opposite direction. When we start with like a trinomial in this case, we want to break it apart into a product of small, simple factors. What are factors? Factors are things that are multiplied together. You've done factoring a lot even before you were in Algebra 1. Like what if I wanted, what are the factors of 6? 2 and 3, right? We broke it up into a product of factors. That's factoring. If you factor 6, you break it into a product of 2 times 3, okay? If I multiply, well then I just get 6, okay? So then we're trying to work backwards in factor stuff, right? So in this case, I want to figure out what two little binomials, they're going to be 2 terms in each binomial, what 2 things am I going to multiply together to get that? Well, what are the first what do the first parts of each one have to be? If I'm going to get an x squared when I distribute, what has to go there and there? X. Everybody agree those have to be x's, for sure. That part's done. Every time those are going to be x's. But now the question is, what are the magic numbers? The magic numbers have to do 2 things. They have to multiply to what? You got to multiply to C. Right, exactly. They got to multiply. A is 1, B is 14, C is 45. So they have to multiply to C, which in this case is 45. And what do they have to add to? B. Every time they have to add to B, which in this case is positive 14. So what would my magic numbers be? Now we can even think about the signs of this, right? So if they're going to multiply to a positive, what does that tell you about the signs of the 2 magic numbers if they multiply to a positive? What's one thing that could be true? Somebody raise your hand and help me out here. Yes, ma'am. Both positive or both negative, exactly. If they multiply to a negative, then I know one's negative and one's positive, right? If they multiply to a positive and add to a positive, what's that telling you? They're both positive. Yeah, so I know I'm getting plus signs here. And what would those numbers be? What numbers multiply to 45 and add to 14? 9 and 5. Right? Okay, let's do the same thing here. So if I want to break this up into a product of factors, and this time I've got w's instead of x's, right? So if I want to get a w squared, I got to have a w and a w. What would my magic numbers have to multiply to this time? 26. Okay, multiply to a positive and add to a negative. So, okay, what can you tell me about the numbers? They multiply to a positive and add to a negative. They'd both be negative. And what numbers would do that? What numbers multiply to 26 and add to 15? Two and 13. There you go. So we're going to get minus 2 and minus 13. Right? You get the idea? Okay. All right, so then now let's backtrack a little bit. Here's why I did all that stuff. We're going to go back and we're going to review real quick how do we convert quadratic functions to vertex form by completing the square. So let's go through these steps again, right? It's been a while. We talked about them yesterday. See if we can remember them. What's the first thing I'm going to do? Set equal to y. So we set them equal to y. So the very first thing we're going to get y equals 3x squared minus 30x plus 146. I would recommend maybe putting this in your notes so you can just kind of go through this. I think it helps to like go through the steps here. So get out your notebooks. Okay, what about step 2? What do I got to do to the right side of my equation? Yeah, I'm gonna. And what's the whole point? What am I trying to make the right side look like? Okay, I need x squared by itself, right? So I got to make the right side, put it into the form x squared. What? And I want to get rid of the constant, right? I just want to have an x squared and then an x term, right? So I'm going to have x squared plus, call it b, some number, call it b times x, right? And I'm going to do that in this case. What are the steps I'd have to go through to make that happen? What would I just, let's see, I'm going to let people, raise some hands. I want to get, everybody's got to contribute once today. Then I won't call people. Yes, ma'am. Awesome, thank you. Subtract 146. What else? Divide by 3. Divide side by 3, and I'd be set then, wouldn't I? Okay, good. So we'll do that in a second. Now, once I get there, then steps 3 and 4 go together. This is the part I want you to see, that steps 3 and 4, I would almost write these down at the same time, okay? Because what's going to happen here is I'm going to, on the right side, I'm going to add something to both sides, really. Whatever I've got on the left side, I've got some stuff on the left side. I've already got things over here, and then I'm going to add the same number to both sides so that in step 5, when I factor it, I'm gonna get the same magic number twice, right? So the right side is gonna end up being x plus my magic number squared, right? That make sense? Those are the steps we're gonna follow, okay? That's steps 3 and 4. I didn't leave myself a lot of room here, but I'm gonna try to make this work. So let's get down to step 2. You already told me the things to do. I have to subtract 146 from both sides. And that's gonna give me y minus 146 equals 3x squared minus 30x. And then you told me to divide by 3, which is correct. Now here's something else people were doing wrong. They were dividing just the first term by 3. Right? We want to get an x squared, so we need to divide by 3, but we have to divide the whole side by 3. Okay? So if we divide each side by 3, look what's going to happen. On the left side, I'm going to get y minus 146 over 3. On the right side, I got to divide each term by my common denominator of 3. So 3x squared divided by 3 gives me x squared. What's negative 30x divided by 3? Negative 10x. Good. Okay, so now step 3. We'll come down to step 3. Step 3, I've got y minus 146 over 3 plus something, because I'm going to add the same thing to both sides, has to equal x squared minus 10x plus the same something, right? That's step 3. And when I do that properly, I'm going to end up down here a little more room. That's step 3. Step 4 means then I'm going to have all this stuff is still on the left side, but on the right side, that's going to factor into x plus my magic number squared, right? Okay, so how do I know what numbers to fill in here, right? All we have to do is we have to look at this, we look back at this step right here and we ask ourselves, what is b, right? So let's make a little box up here. Nancy, what's b? What's the number that's being multiplied by x? Like on the right side. So, I mean, our whole goal here was we wanted to get in step 2 on the right side, we wanted to get x squared plus bx. So b is just whatever's being multiplied by x. Negative 10. That's it. It's the coefficient of x is b, right? Why don't you get rid of that? So b is negative 10. So then what is half of b? Everybody, what's half of b? Negative 5. Okay, well, that's what's going to be my magic number. It's always going to be half of b. So what we can do here is we could always say, okay, if I know what b is, then what's going to go there is going to be half of b every time. So I already know that down here, if b is negative 10, right there it is, I already know that I'm going to end up at the end of step 4 with the magic number being negative 5. My magic numbers are negative 5 and negative 5. Negative 5 squared, right? Does that make sense? Okay, but to make that happen, what do I have to add to both sides? I have to add b over 2, which is half of b squared. Well, what's negative 5 squared? 25. So the number I actually have to add in step 3 is the square of half of b. That's what I'm adding to both sides. So up here I'd be adding 25 to both sides. Everybody agree? Okay, let's see if that works. Play the magic number game. On the right side, in step 3, I get the perfect square trinomial, x squared minus 10x plus 25. What magic numbers multiply to positive 25 and add to negative 10? Negative 5 and negative 5, right? Make sense? So then I get x minus 5. If I factored that, I'd get x minus 5 times x minus 5. But we just write that as x minus 5 squared, right? So you see how we end up getting this. On the other side, I'm just stuck with all this stuff. Y minus 146 over 3 plus 25, right? Okay. But now look what I did. Now I've got my perfect square here. I've got my x minus h squared, which is the hard part. Okay. All I've got to do now is just finish the job by getting y by itself. So step 5 is isolate y. Okay, so now you got to be careful with this. People rush sometimes on this, and they make some mistakes. If I want to isolate y, I've got to use order of operations. In what direction do we go through our order of operations tree if we're trying to isolate something? Good, I'm seeing people pointing up. Bottom to top, right? So we're going to follow order of operations in this direction. We're going to isolate y, right? So what does that mean? Let's run through these steps. That means I'm going to undo any loose addition or subtraction outside of parentheses. Then I'm going to undo any loose multiplication or division outside of parentheses. Then I'm going to undo any exponents. Well, we don't have any exponents to deal with in these problems. And then finally, I'm going to undo everything inside the parentheses. Well, are there any parentheses on the left side? I haven't written any, but are there some implied parentheses? Where are they? Ah, okay, everything on top of the denominator, right? Or the numerator. Everything on top of the fraction. So all this stuff is technically in parentheses, right? So I don't get to that until the last step. So what's the first thing I'm going to do? If I'm going to undo addition or subtraction, what am I doing? Subtracting 25. Okay, so then we end up with y minus 146 over 3 equals x minus 5 squared minus 25, right? Okay, what's next? Multiply by positive 3. Very good. So we're going to multiply both sides. Now I've got to put brackets around the whole side then, because I'm multiplying everything on each side by 3. Well, here we can see that the 3's cancel, and I just get y minus 146 equals, and on this side, I've got to distribute the 3 to each of those two terms, right? Because there's two terms on the right side. So I get 3 times my square, right? 3 times x minus 5 squared. Well, that's looking even better. That looks an awful lot like a times x minus h squared, doesn't it? We're getting there, right? And then when I distribute the 3 to the negative 25, I get a negative 75. And now what's the last step to get the y by itself? Add 146. Good. Finally, we get up to the parentheses, and we add 146 to both sides. And we end up with our final answer, y equals 3 times x minus 5 squared. Negative 75 plus 146 is plus 71. Okay, and we got it. Make sense? Okay? The key here, and this is the part that people tend to mess up on, is seeing this relationship, that once I get to these steps right here, I know that the number that I'm getting, my magic number I'm going to end up with in my square, the magic number that's going to show up twice is always half of b, so that's the thing that we do first, really. We might as well write both those steps at the same time. And then the number that I have to add to both sides to make that happen is that number squared, right? Yes, sir. Yep. Okay, let's do one more without writing down, this got kind of compressed because we wrote out all the steps on the left side. We didn't have much room to do the problem. Let's try one more of these together, just going through the steps one by one. Now, I want you guys to think about these as we go. Do step one on your own, and then we'll talk about it. You tell me what it is. Sorry, go ahead. You know what? Go ahead on it. Yeah, that'll work. Yep, you betcha. Okay, Bye. Everybody write this down real quick. Okay, this is going to be, write that down. I'm going to have you go to the boards. They got to install something on my computer, so I've got to quit anyway for a second.